You are listening to The Evidence Locker. Our cases have been researched using open source and archive materials. It deals with true crimes and real people. Each episode is produced with the utmost respect to the victims, their families, and loved ones. It was after 9 p.m. on Friday night, the 13th of July, 1984. A family of 3 from Gothenburg were traveling in the scenic Lapland Mountains in the north of Sweden. In the Arctic Circle, July is a time for the midnight sun, which means that the sun does not set at all. It is bright and light for 24 hours a day. At this time it was late summer and it had been raining for a couple of days. When they drove down a side road off the Porjus Road to take in the scenery of Lake Appojaure, they could never have imagined what awaited them. A grisly discovery was about to change their holiday into a nightmare. 50 meters from the main road, they saw a Toyota Carina with foreign number plates at a campsite. There was a collapsed tent with something bulging underneath the canvas. They thought someone, perhaps a poacher, had hidden a dead reindeer inside the tent and simply left. But when they saw a lifeless human hand sticking out from under the tent, they realized that something horrible must have taken place at this peaceful camping spot. The remains were those of Janni and Marinus Stegehuis, a Dutch couple in their 30s who were vacationing in Sweden. One of Sweden's most extensive investigations followed, spanning over more than 3 decades. Marinus and Janni Stegehuis came from Almelo, an industrial town of about 70,000 people in the Netherlands. In 1984, they had been married for 13 years and had no children. Janni was a clerk at a recreation center and Marinus was a factory worker at Philips. For 3 years, the couple saved up to go on their dream vacation, a trip through Norway, Sweden, and into Finland. They loved nature and both of them were keen photographers. Visiting this part of the world was exactly their cup of tea. Unspoilt natural beauty, and a sun that never set. They left Almelo at the beginning of July and traveled in their own car, a green Toyota Carina, through West Germany and Denmark to reach their first destination, Ødeshög, in the south of Sweden where they stayed with relatives. This area is known for its natural beauty and breathtaking views of Lake Vättern. It has a rich bird life and nature enthusiasts like Marinus and Janni would find it hard to leave such an idyllic spot. But they did move on. Marinus and Janni got into their car and carried on with the trip of a lifetime. The next stop was Finland, where they visited some friends in the west coast city of Vasa. Vasa has a rich history and tourist sites, including an Iron Age burial ground and walking trails. These are sites that the Dutch couple, being nature enthusiasts, would have visited. After saying farewell to their friends in Vasa, they drove up to the North Cape, the northernmost point of Europe where the Atlantic meets the Arctic Ocean, before they started winding their way down south through Sweden. To have a better understanding of their trip, do have a look in the show notes for a map of their itinerary. It was basically a huge anti-clockwise loop covering many, many miles. Marinus and Janni were a quiet couple who enjoyed the freedom of traveling and stopping as they pleased. They enjoyed the peace and mostly kept to themselves during their trip. They would often stop to appreciate the scenery and take photos for about 15 minutes at a time. If they'd had enough driving for one day, they'd simply pitch their tent, spend the night, and carry on with their road trip the following day. But this dream holiday would be the last holiday that they'd ever take. Janni kept a diary of their travels and recorded the movements of their last days. As planned, they entered Sweden from Finland in the north, starting their southward journey back home to the Netherlands. But after many miles, their car was starting to give them some trouble. It wasn't always starting, and it was running a bit rough. They couldn't take the risk of getting stuck next to the road and decided to find a mechanic. Soon after crossing the border from the north into Sweden, they arrived in the town of Kiruna. A mechanic was able to help them to repair the ailing car. It turned out to be the condenser, so they spent the night in the nearby town of Appojaure while the Toyota was being repaired. On the morning of Thursday, July 12th, They refueled at the Shell service station in Skaulo. This would be the last time anyone would ever see them alive. After refueling, they drove for about an hour. Not wanting to push their luck with their newly repaired car, they decided to stop. The camping site is on Lake Appojaure, nestled in the Lapland Mountains, conveniently close to the towns of Gällivare and Jokkmokk. The scenery is spectacular, with lakes, mountains, and what seems to be an endless sky. In summer, the forests are green and birds are everywhere. Winding through untouched natural beauty with reindeer prancing and birds swooping, some might say this is as close to heaven as one can get. The Stegahoist couple found a quiet spot with a panoramic view of Lake Appojaure and decided to set up camp for the night. There were wooden logs used for benches and a fire pit. At around 4:30 in the afternoon, after they had pitched their tent, they drove to the Great Falls National Park for some sightseeing. They returned by 7 p.m., ate a simple meal of green beans and sausages, and hoped that the weather would turn so that they could make the most of their last leg of this trip. In Yanni's diary, she starts off by mentioning the car trouble. Condenser broken, drove to Great Falls National Park, beautiful surroundings, took pictures, filmed reindeer and saw a stoat behind the car. Pitched a tent at 4:30 in the forest. Mosquitoes continue to torment us. Drizzled all 150 kilometers from Kiruna. Cleared up later, but now it's raining. Here's to our car being back on track. Marinus and Yanni went to bed in their brown two-person tent. Snuggled up into their own sleeping bags, they said goodnight to each other for what would be the last time. The idyllic scene from a couple of hours before turned into a haunting bloodbath of violence and murder. As they were sleeping, they were stabbed through the canvas of their tent by an unknown assailant and left for dead. Yanni died lying on her right side, with her head close to Marinus' body. The rain fell as the souls of Marinus and Yanni left their bodies. The rain Yanni mentioned in her diary was more than a vacation spoiler. It also washed away crucial evidence after the perpetration of the crime. Water washed away footprints in a puddle formed around a bloody knife left behind by the killer. The very same knife that the vacationing couple had used to prepare their last dinner on that fateful night of July the 12th. Murder is not a common occurrence in the far northern part of Sweden. In fact, this was the first case on record where tourists had been murdered in the area. Officer Harry Bronstorm was spending his Friday night at home, in the sauna, when he received the call at 10 p.m., summoning him to the crime scene. Together with his colleague, Einar Jakobsen, they took the 6-mile drive from Gällivare to Lake Appojaure. They speculated as they were driving and concluded that it had to be a suicide. Murder wasn't simply something that ever happened here. It was 11:30 p.m. when police officers Bronstorm and Jakobsen initiated the crime scene investigation at the camping site. As the midnight sun was out, they could start investigation with the advantage of daylight on their side. Noticing that the car had Dutch number plates, investigators could quickly determine that the couple were not local to the area. The tent had a brown outer canvas and a yellow inner canvas with an insect net on the inside. When police reached the scene, it had collapsed with all 10 pegs being pulled out of the ground. Sometime during the nightless night, while they were fast asleep, someone had launched an attack on the pair. The assailant hacked through the canvas of the tent with knives. The Stegahoises had no chance. There was no way they could have defended themselves against this sudden, brutal onslaught. Harry Bronstorm remembered lifting the tent covers for the first glance. Nothing could prepare him for the macabre sight on the inside. He'd said it was like a slaughterhouse. From the entrance of the tent, Marinus was to the left and Yanni was to the right. Both were in their sleeping bags. Marinus had a slight build, was 167 centimeters tall with short, dark blonde hair. Yanni was a bit shorter than Marinus and had short, graying brown hair. The cuts on Yanni's body totaled 20. When police had found her, Yanni's clothes were very bloody. She had deep stab wounds between her shoulders and was bleeding heavily from her mouth. She was also cut on the front of her torso. Her injuries showed that she had moved more than Marinus during the attack, indicating that Marinus was probably attacked first, which startled Yanni. But before she could react or flee, she was attacked. In total, technicians found 25 cuts on Marinus' body, mainly on his shoulders, neck, and arms. There was also evidence that he was struck in the face with a blunt object that cracked his upper jaw. Marinus had wounds on his right forearm and his left hand, indicating that he had tried to defend himself. The wounds tell the tale of a tragic last moment. Marinus waking up in confusion as someone stabbed him through the canvas of the tent. He tried to fend off the attack. Yanni sitting up, tried to help Marinas, or even perhaps get out of the tent. But the force of the attack was simply too strong. They woke up to their worst nightmare. There was no way they could fend off a killer. Looking at the tent after the killing, there were several slashes that cut through both the inner and outer canvases. Evidence shows that the knife also pierced the ground. The majority of the cuts were made by a filleting knife, which was found at the scene. It was the couple's own black handheld filleting knife, and it was probably found in an outside pocket of the tent. The tip of the knife itself broke off during the relentless onslaught of stabs and was found inside. Due to the sheer volume of cuts piercing the canvas and the couple's sleeping bags, investigators believe that more than one knife was used. Marinas and Yanni were victims of what seemed to be a frenzied attack. Back in the Dutch town of Almelo, Detective Frans Wittenaar was tasked with the unpleasant chore of informing the couple's families about their murder before he too went to Appojaure to assist with the investigation. Police found it hard to determine a motive for this senseless slaying and could not approach this like a usual investigation. The couple were only passing through the area, they didn't know anybody, couldn't be a personal revenge killing. The motive was not sexual either, as Yanni was not raped and there were no other signs of sexual interference. Could it perhaps be robbery? With help from the Dutch police who liaised with the victims' families, investigators from Appojaure could find out if any of Marinas' and Yanni's belongings had been stolen. But not much seemed to have been taken. Their passports and their money were both untouched. But it turned out that Yanni's handbag and a portable cassette player were missing. Also, only one camera was found, and the Dutch couple had 2 cameras with them on their trip. But retrieving these items would raise more questions than answers. 10 days after the killing, Yanni's handbag was found near the village center in Renhagen, about 11 miles or 18 kilometers south of the murder scene. It was found inside of another bag which did not belong to the murdered couple. It must have been placed there by the murderer. It was also found quite close to the road, like it was thrown from a moving vehicle. And then almost a year later, on May 27, 1985, the Stegohuis's portable cassette player, a real 1980s boombox, was found near Vittangi, 10 miles or 16 kilometers north of the crime scene. This was where the couple had spent the night before setting off to Lake Appojaure. Could it be that someone had stolen it while they were in Vittangi, or perhaps they simply left it behind? Scientific evidence could not prove that it was put out before the winter. It was pretty much undamaged. Which brought this question. Did someone plant it there shortly before it was found? This could mean that the perpetrator was someone local to the wider Norrland area. Fingerprints not belonging to Marinas or Yanni were found on both the cassette player and Yanni's handbag. This was the first solid evidence that they had. The story of the slaughtered couple made news headlines, not only in Sweden and the Netherlands, but across Europe. Swedish Lapland had always been known to be a safe place to travel. This murder was completely unprecedented. It was an outrage. Police had to follow the couple's last movements, the task that was made easier thanks to Yanni's diary. They were able to have the entries translated from Dutch to Swedish and learned about the car repair in Kiruna. Eyewitnesses came forward and said that they had seen the couple refuel their car in Skalo on that Thursday afternoon of July the 12th. And this night ended in a brutal nightmare that would haunt the Swedish nation for decades to come. When talking about the tent murders at Lake Appojaure in Swedish Lapland, it is impossible to ignore a similar case that happened in the neighboring country of Finland over 2 decades earlier. 4 teenagers from Helsinki went camping on the shores of Lake Bodom in the summer of 1960 and met with a tragic ending. The 2 young couples between the ages of 15 and 18 pitched their tent on the southern peninsula of the lake, about 12 miles or 20 kilometers from the city. Anja Maki's new boyfriend was Seppo Boisman. Mila Bjorklund and Nils Gustafsson had only been dating for a couple of weeks, but this weekend would bind their names together forever. The Saturday night of June the 4th, the foursome suffered a brutal attack. The 2 girls and Seppo died in the tent. Nils, who himself was badly injured, he was the only one to survive. Nils was under a lot of pressure to remember every last detail of his friend's last night alive. He told police that they had spent the night drinking and chatting about their plans for the summer holidays. When the sun had set around 10:30 p.m., they went to sleep. Nils remembers waking up sometime in the night, roused by the sounds of Seppo gathering up his fishing gear. They left the girls and went fishing in the lake, only a couple of yards away. When the fish weren't biting, Seppo decided to go further down along the shore, and Nils returned to the tent where the girls were awake again. The three of them sat up, waiting for Seppo to return. When he did, they all went back to sleep. Nils remembers falling asleep, holding Mila at the entrance of the tent, with Seppo and Anya on the inside. When he woke up in the hospital, he had no idea what had happened. At 6 a.m., eyewitnesses saw a blond man walking away from the collapsed tent and a foot sticking out of it. They didn't think much of it, so had no need to report it. Two boys who came across the fallen tent later in the morning raised the alarm. Mila, Seppo, Anya, and Nils had been bludgeoned with a large blunt object. Mila had suffered the worst of the attack, also being stabbed 15 times in the neck. Anya had 2 massive blows to the head, severe enough to end her life. Seppo was struck on the head 3 times, and he was also stabbed in the neck. Nils, the only survivor, was stabbed 10 times, had a broken jaw, and a concussion. It took him weeks to recover from his injuries. There were several suspects, from a local shop owner who hated tourists, a German-born KGB spy who lived in the area, but they could never build cases strong enough to stick. Eventually, more than 40 years after the crime, police arrested and charged the sole survivor, Nils Gustafsson. His shoes were found over 500 yards from the scene, covered in blood. The theory was that he was drunk and that he had had a fight with his friends, accusing Seppo and Mila of being just too cozy with each other. The fight turned physical, which explains Nils' injuries. His friends proceeded to shut him out of the tent. This had aggravated him and caused him to attack and kill all of them. But Nils maintained his innocence, and the evidence against him did not stack up in court. There was no way he could have attacked his friends with his extensive injuries. He was acquitted and was compensated over 40,000 euros by the state of Finland for suffering caused by the legal procedures against him. The case remains unsolved to this day, but has inspired many urban legends and even a Finnish film. There were 24 years between the Lake Boda murders in Finland and the Lake Appojaure murders in Sweden, but the random nature of the crimes and the scale of the brutality are eerily familiar. Back in Gällivare, in 1984, there were more questions than answers regarding the slaying of Marinas and Jani Stegahois at Lake Appojaure. Police appealed to the public to report any suspicious persons or suspicious behaviors by familiar persons. Police warned tourists not to camp in isolated spots. In a small town like Gällivare, putting your ear against the wall and listening to local speculation and rumors could possibly pay off. Locals refused to believe the perpetrator could be one of their own. Some locals had issues with foreign tourists and wanted to protect the area from mass tourism and commercialization. But police had no reason to believe that the Dutch couple were murdered because of this. They hardly came into contact with anyone during their stay in the area, let alone caused a conflict so strong that someone wanted them dead. They had a huge task to pin down all of the people who were in the area surrounding the murder scene at the time of the crime. There were tourists who drove through by car, only slept for one night and moved on, like the Stegahois couple. Others arrived by bus and stayed for a couple of days. It was also popular with cyclists who cycled through the area, camping as they went. It was near impossible to determine exactly who was in the proximity of the crime scene on that particular night. They had no suspects to tie to the crime. So police tried to establish a motive. Could this killing have something to do with revenge? Were the victims involved in something that they shouldn't have been? The deeper they delved into the Dutch couple's past, the more they realized that this had to be random. The victims were found to be squeaky clean. There was no indication of any illegal activity on their part. They were simply tourists on a road trip who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. During a roadblock on the 16th of July, a police stopped a 33-year-old West German boxer who was cycling through the area. He had a dodgy past and was known to West German police. His disheveled appearance and lack of identification documents alerted him. It was not impossible that he pinched food or belongings from other campers to keep going, seeing as he appeared to have had no means to support himself on his cycling journey. Police interviewed him, but witnesses placed him at another location at the time of the murders. It wasn't him. He was cleared of suspicion after 5 days. Eyewitnesses also saw a middle-aged couple in a Volkswagen minibus parked about 200 yards from the Stegahoy's camping spot on the night of the murder. Police appealed to the public for assistance in identifying the couple who could possibly have some vital information, but no leads came in. Tips did flood in, and police followed up on every lead, but it eventually took them nowhere. Another person of interest was a 28-year-old nicknamed the Bodybuilder, who had a violent temper due to his excessive use of alcohol, drugs, and anabolic steroids. He was no stranger to police as he had been convicted for fraud, illegal possession of firearms, maltreatment, corruption, and larceny. A couple days after the killing, 2 independent tips came into police. The bodybuilder, a woman, and 2 friends set up camp for the night at a resting place near Lake Appojaure. There was a heated argument and the bodybuilder stormed off. When he returned, he had blood on his clothes and he had a bloody knife. He said that he had killed a reindeer and his friends were too scared to push him for any more information. 8 years later, during a prison stint, the bodybuilder's cellmate came forward and said that he had confessed to killing the Dutch couple. The bodybuilder, after storming off, returned to the tent to kill his friends, but made it to the wrong tent and instead killed the Stegahoyses. Was this a case of mistaken identity? Did he mean to kill his camping buddies and not the Stegahoy's couple? Police could find no evidence to substantiate this accusation and found that the cellmate did not have the information he claimed he did. The bodybuilder denied killing the Stegahoy's couple. He also felt that police and witnesses exaggerated his temper and previous run-ins with the law. He remained on law enforcement's radar in the decade after the double murder and was taken in for questioning on several occasions. In the fall of 1996, he committed suicide. He chopped off his forearm with an axe and bled to death. A friend said that it was the constant suspicion cast over him in this case that pushed him over the edge and caused him to end his own life. Police still had to solve the case of the tent murders. They decided it was time to go back to the drawing boards and let the crime scene unearth forensic facts. In March of 1994, almost 10 years after the crime, the Regional Crime Squad in Luleå and the Forensic Department reconstructed the crime scene to determine what had happened. They had to get every last detail, 100%, to make some kind of sense of what took place on the night of the attack. They had set up a tent, similar to the Stegahoy's tent, at their facility in Luleå. Technicians felt that the outer canvas had to have been removed before the assailant struck through the inner canvas. He then started the attack on Marinus, who was on the left side, if you looked in from the doorway. Differing sizes of the cuts on the victims and piercings through the canvas showed that 3 different knives were used. The report of the reconstruction concluded that Marinus was stabbed before he received a blow to the head. At this point, the tent had collapsed already. Almost 10 years after the murder in 1993, this case would go as far south as Stockholm. An unnamed person from the underworld watched a television program called Wanted. There was a segment appealing for information regarding the Dutch murder in Appojaure, and this viewer contacted authorities and informed them that he had the couple's camera bag in his possession. The bag was retrieved, had everything inside including 20 exposed film rolls. The bag was labeled with the name Stegahoy's inside. Police were also able to trace the cameras purchased to a shop in Almelo, confirming that it was the right camera. The person who had the bag said that he had bought it from someone on the street in the fall of 1984 and that he was able to pick the seller out from a photo lineup. The police were cautiously optimistic. This could be the break that they had been waiting for. The man who sold the bag was tracked down and interrogated, but he had no recollection where he found the bag, only that he had sold it. Police linked the witness to a local criminal called Johnny Fairbrink. He was known to the police as a violent drug addict with a long criminal record. The guy who sold the Dutch couple's camera bag had a connection to Fairbrink. He had bought drugs from him in the past, but he maintained he did not get the camera bag off of him. Because of his tendency to violence and long rap sheet, police vaguely suspected him of killing the Stegahoy's couple in 1984. But things were just about to get interesting. In early 1994, police in Gällivare received another tip. Thomas Quick, a patient at the Säter Institution for the Criminally Insane, confessed to killing Marinus and Yanni. Police were skeptical. Thomas Quick's usual victims were young boys who were alone. And that didn't make the attack on the Dutch couple very typical. They could not ignore the confession by any means. so they needed some proof that Quick had more knowledge about the crime. He was asked to draw a sketch of the crime scene, and his drawing was very accurate. Firstly, the position of the campsite was correct, with roads indicating exactly where the Steghuises had pitched their tent. The positions of the car and the tent were spot on, too. Police put their skepticism aside, concluding that the only way that Quick could know all of this is if he had been to the murder scene. Homicide detectives breathed a sigh of relief that after 10 years they could finally pin this senseless murder on someone. But to do this, they had to take a closer look at Thomas Quick. Who was this man who confessed to the murders? Thomas Quick was born in 1950 in Korsnäs, north of Stockholm. His name at birth was Sture Ragnar Bergvall, and he was one of 7 children. He was always yearning for attention, and although his household was a busy one, he often felt very much alone. In 1974, when he was 24, Quick met a man called Lennart Haglund at a gay nightclub in Uppsala. When they arrived back at Lennart's place, Bergvall took a hallucinogenic drug, trichloroethylene, and stabbed his one-night stand 12 times, leaving him for dead. But Lennart survived to tell the story. Quick was sentenced to a psychiatric facility and was treated as an outpatient. In 1991, he was taken to the Säter Institution for the Criminally Insane after a home invasion during which he held a bank manager's wife and son hostage and threatened them for 2 to 3 hours. He was arrested, and institutionalization was found to be the best punishment for this troubled, violent man. During his stay at Säter, he had changed his name from Sture Bergvall to Thomas Quick. 2 years into his therapy, he started to confess to sexually assaulting men, women, and children throughout Scandinavia. Experiencing emotional flashbacks, Quick said that his alter ego, called Ellington, was driven by rage, and that the desire to murder had urged him to commit some of Sweden's most horrific crimes. He killed, dismembered, he even ate the flesh of some of his victims. Police realized that they could be dealing with the worst serial killer in Sweden's history. He was aptly named Sweden's Hannibal Lecter by the press, and all eyes were on the man who called himself Thomas Quick. He confessed to numerous murders of young boys all over Sweden dating back to 1964. All in all, he confessed to 39 murders. His first confession was in 1993. It was about an 11-year-old boy called Johan Esplund who went missing from the Swedish east coast town of Sundsvall in 1980. It was an unsolved crime, one of the biggest mysteries in all of Sweden. Thomas Quick confessed to kidnapping, raping, and then murdering the boy 13 years before. But in spite of taking a shaky Quick to the location where he claimed to have disposed of Johan's body parts, nothing was ever recovered. Johan's parents were also skeptical about Quick's version of events, and they still strongly suspected another man known to the family. The next confession was the murder of Charles Zamanovits, who went missing in 1976 from the northern Swedish town of Petia. His body was found in 1993. Quick said he and another unnamed man had offered Charles a ride home one day. The two men then proceeded to molest Charles. Charles allegedly taunted Quick by saying a boy Quick had murdered was still alive. This spun Quick into a psychotic trance, and he killed Charles. It was quite an unsettling account, but police could never find any physical evidence linking him to Charles Zamanovits' murder. But they did believe him. Who in their right mind would make up something like this? Quick's third confession was that he was responsible for the deaths of Marinus and Jani Steghuis. But this story didn't quite add up. He claimed that on the 12th of July 1984, he was at a train station in Jokkmokk. He stole a woman's bicycle and started roving the area, looking for a young boy to be his next victim. He saw a boy, a foreign tourist, and quickly set his sights on him, but it didn't work out as he had wished. The boy got away before he had a chance to approach him. Jani and Marinus were the first people he came in contact with after this disappointment with the boy. He claimed to have met Marinus and Jani in the town of Jokkmokk, and they told him where they were camping that night. Quick somehow thought that the couple were the foreign boy's parents. When they said that they had no son, he snapped and decided that they had to die. However, Jani makes no mention of taking a 50-mile or 80-kilometer journey to visit Jokkmokk in her diary. Instead, it says they went to the Great Falls, which is near their campsite. And adding so many unnecessary miles to their car that was playing up does not make any sense. Thomas Quick carried on, first saying that he cycled on the stolen woman's bike from Jokkmokk to Appojaure. This journey from Jokkmokk to the campsite would have taken close to 4 hours one way. He would then have to commit a double murder and cycle the same distance back. It just didn't ring true. Although police managed to find a report of the stolen lady's bicycle on the 16th of July, they still lacked conclusive evidence that the bicycle had taken Quick to and from the murder scene. They pushed Quick for an explanation. There had to be another person involved, seeing as Quick could not drive in 1984. People who knew him in the early 1980s confirmed that he did not know how to drive. He only learned to drive in 1987, 3 years after the murders had taken place. Quick then named an accomplice, Johnny Fairbrink. Remember? The guy police tried to connect to the Stegohuis's camera bag found in Stockholm? Yeah, that's him. According to Quick, he bumped into Fairbrink in Jokkmokk but remembered him to be called Johnny Larson. Police confirmed that Fairbrink changed his last name from Larson Auna in 1968, so it was possible that some people still knew him as Johnny Larson. Quick said Fairbrink lured him into his VW pickup truck and they left to have a romantic encounter in a sauna. After the sauna, Quick put the stolen bicycle on the back of Fairbrink's pickup truck and they drove to Appojaure to where Yanni and Marinas were camping. He described the couple's tent, saying it was bluish-gray or yellow, when in fact it was brown and yellow. He retracted this statement later on, stating that he could have been mistaken about the color of the tent canvas. Perhaps there was a rain cover over the tent that obscured the color. Quick said that Fairbrink had started the murderous rampage. It was Fairbrink who lifted a heavy object and attacked the tent wall. Quick went around to the front and entered the tent to launch the knife attack. He confessed that he was in a drug-fueled frenzy when he attacked the Dutch couple. Fairbrink then removed the Stegohuis's camera bag and took it to his pickup truck. He started the attack on the right side of the tent, if looking from the opening, so on Yanni's side. This is contrary to the scientific findings that the attack started on Marinas' side to the left. Quick was adamant that the man laid on the right side and the woman to the left, but this was not what police found at the crime scene, and the bodies were not moved after they had died. His description of the victims was also wrong. He described Marinas as being dark and tall, about Quick's own height of 6 feet 2, making him much taller than he was in reality. Quick said that Yanni had long dark hair, not short graying hair, and that she was naked from the waist up, standing on her knees at the entrance of the tent from where he attacked her. Later on, Quick changed his mind and claimed Yanni was fully clothed where she was. He tells the story of how she tried to fight him off for about 10 minutes before succumbing to her injuries. When she was dead, he pushed her body back into the tent and continued to slash at the canvas. So, all knife blows did not occur through the canvas. Some of them were inflicted directly to the flesh of the victims. Yet all the wounds on the victims forensically show that they were inflicted through the canvas. Yanni had no defensive wounds that would confirm that there was a 10-minute struggle to the death. Quick said he slashed the woman 9 times and the man 5 times, but Yanni was stabbed 20 times, not 9, and Marinas 25 times, not 5. Quick claimed he had taken his own hunting knife to the crime scene and had left it there after the attack. Fairbrink allegedly also had a knife, and they used the couple's knife, which had a light wooden handle. But only one knife was found at the scene, the couple's own filleting knife that had a black handle, not light and wooden. After Quick's confession, police had more questions than answers, but they needed to follow up on what Quick had told them, working closely with a psychiatrist to sift through this information. Psychiatrists believed that Quick could likely have committed the crime. They were using childhood regression therapy, and he could have mistaken the couple for his own parents, finally getting the revenge on them for abusing him as a child. Police set out to verify his story. He was a feasible suspect, he had a violent past, and he had a connection to the area. Quick went to elementary school in Jokkmokk and was familiar with the area, so it wouldn't be too strange for him to find himself there on a random summer night. Then turning to concrete evidence, police took Quick and Fairbrink's fingerprints to compare against the fingerprints found on the Stegohuis's cassette player and Yanni's handbag. Neither of them produced a match. At this point, Fairbrink was already incarcerated and cooperated with police. He denied being involved in the murders. In fact, he had never even met Quick, let alone have a homosexual tryst in a sauna in Lapland. Fairbrink's wife supported him, saying her husband could be many things, but he was very definitely not gay. Fairbrink had unique tattoos on his back and leg. If they were together in a sauna, as Quick had claimed, he must have seen them. Investigators asked Quick to describe Fairbrink's tattoos, but he failed to do so. There was also the fact that Fairbrink had an alibi. His wife had a psychotic episode, and he went with her to a clinic in Södersjukhuset in Stockholm in the early evening of July 13th, after they had spent the whole day together. He completed the paperwork when he checked her into the clinic. Handwriting experts confirmed that it was Fairbrink's handwriting. In October 1995, police were skeptical of Fairbrink's involvement at all. Quick was taken to meet Johnny Fairbrink face-to-face in prison, and it was clear at this encounter that the pair had never met before. Police could also not prove that Fairbrink ever drove or even stolen a VW pickup truck. Fairbrink was not charged, and the investigation solely focused on Thomas Quick. Police weren't about to give up. They had to find concrete evidence to connect him to the crime. Police and representatives of the Regional Crime Squad reconstructed the murder scene to put Quick's confession to the test. On July the 10th, 1995, almost 11 years after the double murder, to the day, police and psychiatrists took Thomas Quick back to the scene of the murder. The crime scene was reconstructed to look exactly like it had in 1984. The plan was for Quick to walk them through the attack to prove conclusively that he was the perpetrator. Quick cooperated. He gave a detailed description of the attack. But from a forensic point of view, it was puzzling. In the tent, 2 mannequins were placed as the married couple, with Marinas to the right and Yanni to the left. This is contrary to Quick's original statement, but he didn't seem to pick up on it. He started the reconstruction of the attack by demonstrating how he had slashed the tent's canvas to the right of the tent, as you're looking at it from the tent's entrance. Shortly after a couple of pretend hacks, he dropped the knife and went around the front, unzipped the tent, and went inside. During the reconstruction, as he acted out the attack on the inside of the tent, his evil alter ego Ellington surfaced, growling and breathing heavily. The reconstruction had to be halted. From here, a whole hour is missing on the video-edited version of the reconstruction. When the video restarts an hour later, Quick says he had done the reconstruction wrong and wanted to do it again. But this time, a version much closer to what forensic evidence found was played out. Quick lifted the outside canvas and showed how he stabbed the couple through the inside cover. He changed his story and claimed that he was hacking at Yanni as she was sitting up, which would explain the wounds on her back. He also alluded to information that hadn't been released to the public at that point, such as the injuries on Marinas' face. He claimed Fairbrink bashed a rock into the tent while he wasn't looking. It could have struck either Marinas or Yanni. With the second version of the reconstruction caught on tape, police felt confident that Thomas Quick was, without a doubt, the assailant. He confessed that he was responsible for the crime, walked them through the actions, though it took him a while to get his story straight. And it was now time to take this case to trial. In court, only the second version of the reconstruction was presented, thus neatly corresponding with the facts. In January 1996, the Gällivare District Court sentenced Sture Bergvall, aka Thomas Quick, for murder and ruled that Sture Bergvall, aka Thomas Quick, should remain in legal psychiatric care at the Säter Institution for the Criminally Insane. He continued confessing to another 15 murders in Scandinavia. He had 8 murder convictions, purely based on his confessions. No further investigation was done to confirm his stories. Mostly it went like this. He confessed, was given an ample dose of his favorite drug, benzodiazepine, then police would interrogate him with leading questions. Most of the time he only nodded or said yes, and very often his vague reference to details made it clear that he had no knowledge of the crimes he claimed to have committed. In 2001, still in Säter, a new psychiatrist to the clinic stopped Quick's drug prescriptions. As Quick sobered up, he changed his name back to Sture Bergvall and stopped talking to police. He was silent for an entire 7 years before award-winning investigative journalist Hannes Rastam looked into the case. After working through all transcriptions of court proceedings and Bergvall's sessions with psychiatrists, he realized that there was not one shred of concrete evidence connecting Thomas Quick or Sture Bergvall to any of the crimes he had claimed that he had committed. In 2008, on a television interview, Thomas Quick, who had changed his name back to Sture Bergvall, made his last confession to journalist Hannes Ramstam. Turns out all of his confessions were made up. They're all fabricated. He officially recanted his confessions. Later, Bergvall said police investigator Seppo Penttinen and memory expert Sven-Åke Christensen had told him how the crime scene was laid out while they were driving to the reconstructed crime scene in 1995. Both professionals denied it. Bergvall also claims that he was fed information during questioning, leading him to make a false confession. Police interfered to make him look guilty. But why would someone do this? Why confess to the murders and heinous crimes you did not commit? The reasons were simpler than one might think. He loved the attention he received from the psychiatrists, the police, and the media. And at Seder, he also received special privileges because of his high profile. He had a big room, he could move around freely. For a drug addict like Bergvall, it was an added bonus that he was fed a constant supply of mind-numbing prescription drugs. After he confessed to Johan Asplin's murder, he was taken to the crime scene to point out where the body was. Although they did not find any of the young boy's remains, police and psychiatrists felt that the day was successful. They went for a celebratory dinner, and everybody, including Bergvall, ate a feast and ended it off with a cigar. Being banished to Seder, he felt that he was onto something. The more that he confessed, the more excursions he'd be taken on, and consequently the more rewards he would receive. But when he sobered up, he realized that he could not carry on the facade any longer. But if he had told the truth, who would have believed him? So the obvious question is, how could he have known the facts regarding the murders? Bergvall says he read a lot of newspaper articles about unsolved crimes. In fact, in the 1980s, he was known to have researched unsolved murders in the Royal Library in Stockholm. True crime enthusiast, if you will. Even in Seder, he had library access. He read The Silence of the Lambs and American Psycho, which inspired many of his fabricated details. If you were to only look at the evidence of this one case, though, the Appojaure tent killings, Bergvall's initial confession hardly had one fact correct. His story did not match the evidence at all. Yet everybody around him was so excited that this prototype of serial killer was willing to open himself up to psychiatric experiments and cooperated that they made his confession fit the crime. If anything, his initial confession and his first walkthrough of the reconstructed crime scene should have shown them that he had no idea what happened to Jani and Marina Stegehuis, and that he had never been to the crime scene as he had claimed. And when Fairbrink was acquitted, surely that should have raised some questions about the integrity of the confession as well. Luckily, for Sture Bergvall, people who believed in his innocence did not give up the fight. On July 30th, 2013, he was acquitted of all 8 murders in which he had confessed to. There was not a shred of physical or any other evidence linking Quick to any of the crimes. In March 2014, Sture Bergvall was released from Seder after 23 years. Yeah, he did stab Leonard Haugland in 1974. He did hold the bank manager's family hostage in the 1990s. But turns out, he was never Sweden's most prolific serial killer. He was a complete mythomaniac who thrived on attention given to him by psychiatrists, police, and media. The public was outraged that the system could have been fooled by a man such as this. And to make matters even worse, whoever killed Jani and Marinus and the rest of Quick's supposed victims literally got away with murder. Swedish police did reopen the case into the murders of Marinus and Jani Stegehuis. It still remains open today, but the lack of motive keeps the investigators in the dark. It was a random, unprovoked attack, in all probability committed by someone unknown to the victims. Criminologists and experts feel that the perpetrator acted alone and was a local familiar to the area. Of all the suspects in this case, the man known as the bodybuilder, or someone fitting his criminal profile, was most likely responsible for the double murder. If you'd like to read up more about this case, have a look at the resources used for this episode in the show notes. You might also find the documentary, The Confessions of Thomas Quick, interesting. You'll find it on Netflix. This was The Evidence Locker. Thank you for listening.